So we have the last session this morning. It's a pleasure to welcome Professor Diptiman Sen from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. We essentially dragged him here for one day. Very happy that he is able to come. So before we begin the talk, two short announcements. One is that soon after this, before we eat, we will have a group photograph. And then, as you know, at 2 o'clock we have a bus that will take us to this very nice place, Blue Lagoon. It's on the seashore. All of you are welcome. I'm sorry that we did not send. We have been very slack in terms of sending invitations and so on. It's a nice place. It's on the beach. It's not a 5-star type of place, but very green and very nice. So there will be 3 talks. One talk by Sharat Chandra, and then 2 talks by 2 of our colleagues. And then Moita. So there is also apparently a swimming pool there. I don't know if there is water. But so please bring your swimming costumes with you. Of course, there is sea. The sea there will be slightly better than the sea here as you move away from the city. But there are strong currents. So unless you are a great swimmer, you are not advised to go into the water. So that's about this afternoon, but Shankar has more to say.
Yeah, there's also a swimming pool in that place.
With water?
So, with water in it, yes. But towels probably will be available, but swimming trunks I think you'll have to take along. The other thing is, please give in your filled up TA forms, and if there are any Ginger Hotel bills by lunchtime today, and also your departure information. So, because if you get it by lunchtime today, then we'll be able to do things by tomorrow. Thanks.
So we will have the conference dinner will be at 7 o'clock, and then it will go for an hour and a half or so. It will return back. Anything else? Photograph is at 1 o'clock, soon after this. So now it's a pleasure to welcome Diptiman again. He will tell us about AKLT model, matrix product states, and so on.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me to give this talk. So this is really just going to be about matrix products, matrix product states, and I don't really know much about the connection between matrix product states and DMRG, so I won't touch upon that at all. So this is just a basic introduction to matrix product states. So matrix product states essentially are wave functions or one-dimensional systems, let's say spin systems, which have the form of a product of lots of matrices. Okay, so one matrix for every unit cell. Okay, so this is a product of matrices over unit cells of a system. One-dimensional system. Everyone read my handwriting? So let me start with a really trivial example. So the most trivial example you can think of is the ferromagnetic state, right? So every every spin, let's say, is up. Let's say you have a spin half at every side on a chain, and every spin is up. So this is obviously a product, a direct product of spin up at every side. But this is a very trivial example because it just factorizes into products of states at every site. So let me jump now to a much more complicated example of matrix product state, and this is what the ground state of the AKLT model is. Okay, so let me talk about the AKLT model. Okay, so I'm actually going to spend about half an hour on this model because it's a very pretty model where the ground state can be written down exactly. Turns out to be a matrix product, and it's a spin 1 model. Okay, so it's very rare that a spin 1 chain in one dimension actually has an exact ground state. Okay, so here let me write down the Hamiltonian first. Let me write down the reference first. Okay, So this is a paper by Affleck, very famous paper, Affleck, Kennedy, Lieb, Tasaki. So they had a PRL, but a much longer paper which was in Communications of Math Physics. 115, 477, 1988. So the idea is the following, that you have spin ones on a chain. So let's call them n, n plus 1, n plus 2 and so on. And you have spin ones at every site. Now if you take two spin ones, then you discover that if you take S1 dot S2, then this can have the following possible values. For the singlet state, this is minus 2. Okay. Then there is a spin 1 state, which is for which this is minus 1, and then there is a spin 2 state for which I guess this is, I've forgotten right now, I guess is 1. Okay. So these are the three possible values. So two spin 1s can form total spin 0, 1 and 2, and these are the values of S1 dot S2 for those three states. Okay. So if you construct something like S1 dot S2 plus 1 times S1 dot S2 plus 2, some object like this, let me call it H12, then I can see that this gives you 0 for total spin 0 of the two states, or total spin 1 for the two states, and it gives you something for total spin 2. So if you take this as your Hamiltonian, so you just take your Hamiltonian to be sum over n, h, n, n plus 1, then the ground state of this, so the ground state is one in which n, the spins n and n plus 1 do not form total spin S equal to 2, right? In fact, the ground state energy will be just 0 if none of the neighboring spins form total spin 2. So if they are all going to form total spin 0 or 1, then that H12 that I wrote down there is 0, so the total ground state energy is also 0. Okay. So now you might ask the question, is there any state at all like that, where every neighboring pair of spins form total spin either 0 or 1 and not spin 2 at all? Okay. And it turns out there is a state like that, and that's called the AKLT state. So it goes like this. So you think of a spin 1 at each site as a combination of two spin halves, right? So these are two spin halves in a symmetry combination. Okay. And then you do the following thing. So you have a spin 1 at all these different sites in a chain, n plus 1, these are the site labels. And you form singlets between a spin half at one site and a spin half at the next site. Okay? So a singlet between those two and a singlet between those two and so on. Now as a result of this construction, and of course you remember that you have to symmetrize between the two spin halves at every site. So this is actually more complicated than the way I've drawn it, because you really have to symmetrize between the singlets between the two sites at between the two spin halves at every site. So if you just look at this part of this wave function, then one spin half at each of the sites have already formed a singlet, so you have one more spin half left over, and those two spin halves together can either form a singlet or a triplet, which means that these two spins at n and n plus 1 can either form total spin equal to 0 or 1. They cannot form 2. Okay? So that's the idea. So because you've already used up one of the spin halves at each side to form a singlet, whatever is left now cannot form a total spin 2. And so this state that I wrote down there, by just drawing the singlet lines, is by construction a state in which neighboring spins cannot form total spin 2. Okay, so this is the ground state of this Hamiltonian. Is that clear, or should I say something more about that? So now I'll tell you in more detail about why this can be written as a matrix product state. Yeah.
elaborate
Yeah.
how taking two spin, you get symmetric combination, spin one and
Yeah. So I'll come. I'll.
just elaborate that.
Yeah. So I'll come to that actually. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to actually write down this thing in using a particular notation. Right now it's all pictures and lines and so on. So I'm now going to use some algebraic notation. Okay. So for a spin half, let me use the symbol alpha to denote spin up, and beta to denote spin down. Okay. Now for spin 1, I can think of this spin 1 as made out of two spin halves in a symmetry combination, as I said, and so alpha squared will denote two spins up, two spin halves up. So that will be a state with spin, total spin plus 1 and m is equal to plus 1. M is just sz. Okay. Similarly, beta squared will be two spins down, and that will denote total spin equal to 1 and m equals minus 1. Okay, so that leaves us with the last state, which is m equal to 0. Now it turns out that there is a slight factor of root 2 that you have to worry about a little bit. So remember that if you use two spin halves in a symmetric combination, that's up down plus down up by root 2. Okay, so that's actually s equals 1, m equal to 0. But this is the same as alpha beta plus beta alpha by root 2. Okay, so that's m equal to 0, which means that alpha beta is actually equal to m equal to 0 by root 2. Okay, so here we have used the fact that at a given site there is no difference between alpha beta and beta alpha, they are the same state. Okay. Right, so to summarize this, alpha squared is equal to m equals 1, beta squared is equal to m equals minus 1, but alpha beta is equal to m equal to 0 by square root of 2. Okay. Okay, so does that answer your question of how you take two spin halves and form a spin 1 in a symmetric way? Okay, so now I'm going to write this this ground state. So this is called the equality state.
Write down the fourth state that's left out. That we also fill.
Sorry?
3 states have been taken out.
Yeah.
What is the wrong state?
Yeah, so the wrong state is not a state of, so the wrong state you cannot actually write, because that will be alpha beta minus beta alpha, and that will be 0. So at a given site, if you are only going to symmetrize between the two spin halves, then you cannot write this state, the singlet state. Okay, so that's basically not there. Okay, so we are just taking the 3 symmetric combinations to give you the 3 different states of total spin 1.
This is figure m equal to minus 1. Instead of writing
Yeah, m equals minus 1. Right. Okay, so now we are going to write this down in this algebraic notation: n, n plus 1, n plus 2, and so on. Now, if you are going to form, so this part, okay, which is a singlet made out of a spin half from n and a spin half from n plus 1, I can write this as up n, down n plus 1, minus down n and up n plus 1 by root 2. So that's alpha n beta n plus 1 minus beta n alpha n plus 1 by root 2. Okay. Then I can write it in the following way. So this signs are very important here. So I'll write it in the following way: alpha n minus 1 beta n, alpha n beta n beta n plus 1 minus alpha n plus 1. Okay. I'm ignoring the root 2 for the moment. We'll come back to the normalization in a little while. Okay, so is that fine? So that state alpha beta minus beta alpha, I can write it as this product of this row times this column. Okay, and the AKLT state is the product of this over all values of n. Right? So product of this times that and so on. Is that okay? By definition, yes, because whenever you have a product of two alphas, let's say m equals 1 state at a site, when you have product of two betas, let's say m equals -1, and alpha times beta is m equals 0. Okay. So by definition, it's symmetric. So I hope this is clear that when you take this product over n, then it involves all the sites, and because every site will have both a row and a column, so every site will have one of the three states appearing, alpha squared or beta squared or alpha beta. It's an infinite chain. Okay, so right now I'm not worrying about the boundary conditions. So this is now actually a product of numbers as it stands, because a row times a column is a number. So what we have is a product of numbers at different sites. So this is not a product of matrices, this is a product of numbers. But you can convert this into a product of matrices by just replacing inner products by outer products. So I can just write this as, because this is an infinite chain, I can write this as beta n plus 1 minus alpha n plus 1 into alpha n plus 1 beta n plus 1. Right? So what I did is I just took this one and took the n plus 1th counterpart of that and put it on the right hand side. Right? Is that fine? And now this is a product of matrices, because this is equal to product over n, beta n plus 1, alpha n plus 1, beta squared n plus 1, minus alpha squared n plus 1, minus alpha n plus 1, beta n plus 1. Right. So what we have done is that this was a state we started with. This is one, and then this was another. So I now paired them up in a different way. I took these two together, okay, and that's a matrix, 2 by 2 matrix. Then I took these two together, that's a 2 by 2 matrix, and so on. Yeah. Right. So the thing that I wrote earlier with product of numbers is the same as what I've written here as product of matrices. Okay. So again, I'm not worrying about boundary conditions. If you have a periodic, if you have a chain with periodic boundary conditions, you have to take the trace of this at the end. If you have chain with open boundary conditions, then you don't take the trace. Okay. Then this can also be written as product over n of this state 0 by root 2, state minus 1, minus state 1, and minus the state 0 by root 2. And this is at the site n plus 1. Okay. So all these the different states, m equal to 0, plus 1 and minus 1 are at the site n plus 1, and then you have a product over all the values of n. All right. So it turns out that the correct normalization is not exactly this. You get the correct normalization by multiplying throughout by square root of 2 by 3. So let me do that. So it turns out that the normalization you should really use is product over n. It turns out to be 0 by root 3, and it will be clear in a little while why we have to do this. Minus 1, then minus root 2 by 3, 1, and then minus 0 by root 3. n. So I can write this as n or n plus 1, it doesn't matter because it's a product over all n's. Okay, so this is the matrix product form for the AKLT state. So next thing we have to know is how to do calculations with this state. Okay, so first thing we should figure out is how do we calculate the norm of this state. Okay, it looks like a very complicated object, right? It's product of matrices, an infinite number of matrices. So it turns out that the norm of the state is actually fairly easy to calculate. So one thing that you have to be a little careful about is that this is beginning to sound a lot like transfer matrices. Okay? But these are not transfer matrices. The individual components are not probabilities but amplitudes. Okay? Whereas in a transfer matrix, the individual components are probabilities. So to calculate things like norms or expectation values and all, you have to square these things in some sense. Okay? There are 3 index of in this. Okay, so that's right. So each one. So there is a site label in. Okay, that's one number, and then these are 2 by 2 matrices. So they have components A, B. In that sense, I guess there are 3 index objects. Yes. That's right. Yes. Yeah. So there is a spin structure to this which I'll come to in a few minutes. So let me just calculate the norm of this and see how that goes. Yeah.
Normally when matrix product is motivated, you have a get, and then there is an amplitude which is a complex number,
Right.
which is given a matrix product. Now your gets are also inside.
Right.
It's possible to pull it out and exhibit the numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can do it. You can do it that way. But this is equally easy to work with. Let me just do a couple of calculations, and you'll see that you can get used to this very quickly.
No, I agree. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is the way tensor products have been motivated so far.
Right.
In the SZ representation, you have a get, and then there is a complex number which is amplitude.
Right.
That has a matrix product. Here it's entirely.
True.
But there is one representation using Schwinger boson.
Okay.
Recollect it
Okay. Yeah.
where you can explicitly write down the numbers.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So let me call the state psi. Is this? So what we are interested in calculating is what is psi. Okay, so this sounds very complicated, but actually it's not complicated at all. So it turns out all you have to do is just take one of these matrices and just take the inner product with itself, element by element. That's really all you have to do. So, if this is your matrix, 0 by root, the first one is the state 0 by root 3. That gives you you just take the square of that, so that gives you 1/3. Okay, the next element is the square of that one, so that's 2/3, and then this one gives you 2/3. It's just square root of minus root 2 by 3, and then you get 1/3. Okay, and then you have to take the product of this over n. Well, I've been using this symbol multiplying n. Okay, so that's actually the norm of this state. Times trace, you have to take the trace. So now, if you have a chain with periodic boundary conditions, you have to take the trace of this. Okay, so this is actually a transfer matrix now. Okay, now that we have calculated the norm, this is a transfer matrix, so you have to take the trace of this to get. Sorry. You have to take the trace of this product.
So then we the power.
No, this is 1/3, 2/3, 2/3, 1/3. So the eigenvalues of this are 1 and minus 1/3. Right? The eigenvalues of this are 1 and minus 1/3. So if you take the trace of a large number of them, suppose that there are L sites. Okay? So then you have psi is equal to, when you take the trace, you get 1 to the power L plus minus 1/3 to the power L. Okay? And so in the limit of very large L goes to 1 as L goes to infinity. Okay? So it's correctly normalized in the limit L going to infinity, and that's the reason I put in those factors of square root of 3 and so on, so that it's normalized to 1. Okay?
This is actually a transfer matrix. Transfer matrix is something that transfers the property of site n plus 1 being up or down, given that the property of site.
So this is the same interpretation. It tells you.
This is only for the single site.
No, so this in fact tells you, so if you take any element that you get by multiplying all these matrices 1/3, 2/3, etc., if you take any one of those elements, that will be the probability of one particular state. Let's say 0 at site n, 1 at site n plus 1, minus 1 at site n minus 1. It will be the probability of one of those states. Yeah, so it has exactly the same interpretation as a transfer matrix. But you have to take this mod side to, you have to take this inner product to get this. Earlier what you had was just the matrix of amplitudes rather than probabilities. Yeah.
That 2 by 2 matrix, am I wrong with the trace is 2/3?
No, but this is the trace of a product of n of them.
But each
So let me rewrite this as follows. Let me rewrite this as follows. It's 1/3, 2/3, 2/3, 1/3 to the power L.
but it's a different, it's a tensor product.
It's just a product of matrices. Maybe we can discuss this later. It's actually, it's just a product of 2 by 2 matrices, L of them, and then you're taking the trace of that.
That product is a tensor product.
It's just a product of 2 by 2 matrices.
The product.
So he's using non-conventional notation. He's using non-conventional notation.
Oh.
See, I take one 2 by 2 matrix and then make a direct product with another.
No, so it's not a direct product. Yeah, I didn't mean a direct product at any step. I just that symbol crossed with this thing is the LaTeX command for product.
That is very sense for cats. The command for that is.
Yeah. Okay. So let me go ahead and now try to let me calculate some. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So let me now calculate some expectation values. Okay, to see really how useful these matrix products are. Okay. So let me calculate something like S0. So S0Z squared. So by that I just mean, so S0Z, so the 0 refers to the site n equal to 0. So I'm just calculating SZ squared, the expectation value of that. So remember SZ has 3 possible values, +1, 0 and -1. Okay, so we want to see what this is equal to. Okay. So this is a trace of, you have matrices like this, 1/3, 2/3, 2/3, 1/3. Okay. So a string of these, but at some point when you get to the n equal to 0 state, so remember that the 1/3, 2/3, 2/3, 1/3 came from this came from some matrix of amplitudes like this. At this point, if I put an S0Z over there, right, S0Z squared over there, so the S0Z squared for this state is 0. That's a state with SZ equal to 0, so SZ squared is 0. This one has SZ squared equal to +1. SZ is -1, so SZ squared is equal to +1. This one has SZ squared equal to +1 again, but there's a minus sign in front of it. And this one has an SZ squared equal to 0. Okay. So when you calculate this S0Z squared, what you have is you have a 0, then you get a 2/3, then you get a 2/3, and you get a 0. Okay. So that n equal to 0 state gets replaced by 0, 2/3, 2/3, 0. No, it's plus 2/3 because there's a -2. So minus √2/3. This thing you have to square to get the probability. So that's a 2/3, and then S0Z squared is a +1. Okay. So it's a plus 2/3 for the same reason that it's plus 2/3 in the norm. It's the square of that minus √2/3. Okay, so I've lost track of my notes, so this is all from memory now. Divided by trace of 1/3, 2/3, 2/3, 1/3 to the power L. Okay, so if you do this calculation, you discover that this is equal to 2/3. Okay. Okay, so the expectation value of SZ squared is 2/3. So this kind of makes sense because it's telling you that the 3 states SZ equal to +1, -1 and 0 are equally probable. And so the states which are SZ equal to +1, -1, they each contribute 1 with a probability of 1/3 each, and the state SZ equal to 0 contributes 0. Okay, so you get 2/3. Okay, so I won't show you the details of the other calculations, but I'll just tell you the results. So when you take S0Z with S1Z, it turns out that, in fact any SNZ, it turns out that you get 4 by 3 times minus 1/3 to the power mod n. Okay. So this general structure actually is not very hard to anticipate. Remember that the two eigenvalues of the transfer matrix were 1 and minus 1/3. And whenever you have a transfer matrix and you calculate an expectation value, it falls off with the distance as the ratio of the second largest eigenvalue to the largest eigenvalue to the nth power. Okay. So here the eigenvalues are minus 1/3 and 1, so it falls off as minus 1/3 divided by 1 to the power, the distance between the 2 points. Okay.
So what's n equal to 0 here to get the previous answer?
So n equal to 0 is a special case. So there you don't get, if you can't set n equal to 0 and get the previous case. But this formula here works for all values of n from 1 onwards, and also from minus 1, minus 2 and so on. Okay, so one simple check that you can do, some rule if you like, is that if you take S0Z and sum over n equals minus infinity to infinity SNZ, you just add up all these numbers, you get 0. Okay. And the reason for that is that, you see, this equality state is a state with total spin equal to 0. Okay. So this thing by itself is equal to 0. Okay. Okay, so that brings me to the question of discussing the spin of these.
Yesterday, you come down.
Yeah.
This boundary oscillation.
Yeah, I'll come to that. I'll come to that in a second. Okay, so now let me tell you, let me say a little bit about the spin structure of this AKLD state. Yeah. I'll come to it. Yeah, just hang on. Okay. Now this object that I written down a little while ago, 0 by root 3, I always forget this. Root 2 by 3 minus 1. So let me write it in the following form. So now I'll do what you were asking me to do a little while ago, which is I'll write it as this is awful, minus. So since I'm doing this from memory, I'll get lots of factors wrong, I think. Sorry, minus 1 plus 1. Okay, and I guess there's a factor 1 by root 3 outside. Okay, so let me write it in that form. So that's correct, right? So I've just written that matrix as sum over Pauli matrices times the 3 different spin states, 0, plus or minus 1. Now it turns out that these 3 spin states that I wrote down there, sigma x equal to plus I sigma y by root 2, is actually, it's like an L equals 1 state, not L equal, LZ equal to 1 state, and then minus sigma of some other angular momentum, right? Not the same angular momentum as the spin 1 sites, but angular momentum in some other space. Yes, with 3 components. So sigma z is equal to Lz equal to 0, and then minus sigma x minus I sigma y by root 2 is Lz equal to minus 1. Okay. Now you may be a little puzzled about these relative signs. The first one has a plus sign, the second one has a minus sign, the third one also has a minus sign. I was a little puzzled by this myself till I actually looked up the spherical harmonics in a book. And the spherical harmonics, if you're careful about them, actually have these signs. So if you look at the spherical harmonics for L equals 1, then x plus iy is actually Lz equal to 1. When you act on this with L minus, you put a 1 by root 2. When you act on this with L minus, it actually gives you minus z. So that's Lz equal to 0. And then you act on it with L minus, and that gives you minus x minus iy by root 2. And so that's Lz equal to minus 1.
Probably depends upon the choice of phase you have made for the spherical harmonics.
So the choice of phase I made is the very first one, x plus iy, I have taken it to be that particular phase with a plus sign.
For the spherical harmonics, you have 2, 3 different phases.
Yeah, so once you choose one of them, then the others are fixed, because if you choose the top one, x plus iy, then you just get the others by repeatedly acting with L minus. So I've made a choice for the first one, which is x plus iy, then the others are come out to be with minus signs. Now the point about this is that, so maybe I'll just say this in words. So here I have, this is now a combination of two spin 1 objects. Okay, this is an Lz equal to minus 1, this is Sz equal to, this is an Lz equal to plus 1, this is Sz equal to minus 1. This is an Lz equal to 0 and this is Sz equal to 0, and it has a minus sign. So I've goofed up with a sign somewhere. This should be a plus here and then minus over there. I didn't goof up with the sign, I just wrote them wrong. And then this is Lz equal to minus 1 with an Sz equal to plus 1. So what you have in this is Lz equal to plus 1 Sz equal to minus 1 minus Lz equal to 0, Sz equal to 0, plus Lz equal to minus 1, Sz equal to plus 1. Okay, so that's what that combination is, the Pauli matrices times the 3 states of spin 1. And you recognize this object as a singlet made out of 2 spin 1s. Right? That's a particular linear combination that you take which gives you a singlet. Okay, so this is a singlet now of some bigger rotation group which includes rotations of the Pauli matrices and the rotations of the spin 1s. Okay, so under this bigger group, this is singlet. Okay.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
The sigma is a linear operator of the vector space.
Yes.
So there is an adjoint action.
Yes.
That will give the angular momentum u.
Right.
But that is not what we are talking about. Because you are getting spins which are, otherwise I can back the same thing.
Yes, but I mean the angular momentum that I'm talking about for the sigmas is exactly that.
Just adjoint action.
Yes. Okay, so this actually shows that this particular combination that I had, 0 by root 3, etc., that's actually a total spin singlet. Right? This is a total spin singlet. Okay, because it's the right linear combination to form a singlet out of 2 spin 1s. But it's a spin singlet under this bigger group, which is something that rotates the Pauli matrices and rotates the spin 1s at every site. Because it involves both the Pauli matrices and the individual spins. Whereas the Pauli matrices are not physical spins, right? The Pauli matrices are just something that appear in the matrix product state. The physical spins are only the S equals 1s. Bigger representation, yeah. So therefore, if you take something like trace of all these matrices, 0 by root 3, etc., if you take the trace, then at the end of the trace, the Pauli matrices are all gone, right? Because when you take the trace, you're tracing over the 2 by 2 matrices. So what you're left with is something which is a singlet only for the rotations of the spin 1s. Okay. If you didn't take the trace, then it would be a singlet under the product of the two groups, the Pauli matrices and the spin 1s. But once you have taken the trace, then the Pauli matrices are gone, so this is a singlet only for the spin 1s. Trace of this to the power L, sorry, this to the power L. This is the product of those L objects. Yeah, I wrote it in the previous one also. This is the matrix product state, the AKLT state. Okay, so this tells you that when you take the trace, so when you're using periodic boundary condition with L sites, then the state that you get is actually a singlet. The next thing you can ask is what will happen if you don't take the trace. Suppose you have a chain with open boundary conditions. So you just have 0 by root 3 etc. to the power L, but you don't take a trace. Okay. So at the end of everything, you just get a 2 by 2 matrix, right? With some very complicated state here. Lots of spins, lots of spins. Now this is a total, under the total group, you know, both the Pauli matrices and the spin ones, this is a singlet. But the Pauli matrices by themselves form a spin 1 representation that I just showed you a little while ago. Okay. So this is a singlet under everything, but the Pauli matrices by themselves form a spin 1 representation. So what is the representation that the spin 1s have to form? If the Pauli matrices form a spin 1 and the total thing is a spin 0, so the spin 1s have to form a spin 1 representation of their own. Okay. So that means the different combinations that you have here, these form a spin 1 representation of the spin 1s. Okay. Total spin 1 combination of the spin 1s. Okay, so that means that when you have an open chain, okay, and you don't take the trace, so trace is not taken, then these different states that you get, the states of spin 1s form a representation with total spin 1.
So there are two spin halves.
Yeah. So now going back to the original picture, as Bhaskaran is saying, if you go back to the original picture, if you have an open chain like that which just ends on the left and right, you have an extra spin half here and extra spin half left over there, and those two spin halves can either form a singlet or they can form a triplet. The singlet corresponds to taking the trace of that matrix product, and yeah, the triplet stage, the three of them, are what you get when you don't take the trace. Okay, so those are the 4 states that you have in a spin 1 chain with open boundary conditions. Yeah.
So there's something misleading when you calculate the expectation value.
Yeah.
S not Sn, it had an arm rate oscillation.
Yes.
Exponentially decaying.
Right.
Whereas here it looks as if that spin bar is just localized at the boundary alone. In this picture, the unpaired moment.
Yeah. No, it is localized at the boundary, but
Magnetization oscillation.
oh, I see. Yes, that's true. So if you calculate, so with an open boundary condition, if you calculate the magnetization near the end, you will see that it oscillates. It goes.
That's what you showed.
Yeah, it decays to 0 as you go into the bulk, but it oscillates with it falls off as minus 1/3 to the power n.
Valence bond picture is somewhat misleading.
Yeah, you shouldn't read this as having a spin half right at the end.
So it's
Yeah.
distributed over some.
Right, yeah. You can also ask this question that, so in an open chain, you have a singlet state, one singlet state, which corresponds to the trace, and 3 triplet states where you don't take the trace. If the chain was infinitely long, these 2 states would be degenerate in energy. But if it's not infinitely long, then there's a breaking of the degeneracy. And the breaking of the degeneracy is proportional to 1/3 to the power L. So it falls off exponentially. The energy splitting between the singlet and the triplet falls off exponentially with the system size.
You can also move this alloying spin into the bulk by creating a double bond in one of them.
Yes.
Are these very higher energy or are they? I mean, these states, if I say put a double bond in the first extreme left thing.
Like that. And then something like this?
That's right. So then the hanging spin is in the bulk.
Yeah.
So it looks like a bulk excitation, but is it good in energy or?
That I.
The finite chain, is it a linear combination of all these states, is it also?
No, if you move, no, but if you move it very far into the bulk, then it will give you a very bad state. So suppose you do something like this, lots of them near the end, and then you have an AKLT state. This is actually very bad because all these bonds are unsatisfied.
But all those need not be double bonds. I can make an AKLT on this side also.
Oh, so you mean just the first state here?
Huh.
You just want to do that.
Make a, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. So interestingly, Naveen and I have a paper where the ground state has it can be either AKLT or it can be double bonds. They're equally degenerate, and so there actually these have the same energy, but that's a different kind of.
How we modify the Hamiltonian for that?
So I don't remember right now. I can look up our paper and tell you. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's actually all I wanted to say about AKLT. You can also form, so AKLT, that state that I showed is the exact ground state of the system. The excited states are not exactly known for this, but you can form very good variational wave functions for the excited state. So the way you can form excited states is, so again I'm going to take an infinite chain and not worry about the end effects. What you do is that you break one of these singlets, okay, between n and n plus 1, and you replace them by just, let's say, 2 spin ups. So you replace that singlet bond by a triplet, okay. So let's call this state n, okay. So this is not an exact eigenstate of the Hamiltonian. So you can think of this as a variational excitation. Then you can form a momentum eigenstate by taking the sum over n e to the I k n n. Most cases, but okay, this calculation was done by Totsuka and Suzuki. JPCM, Journal of Physics, Condensed Matter 7, 1639, 1995. Okay, and this is a calculation that can be done analytically, and they got the following result, which is okay, here it is, 50 by 30 cos k divided by 27. Okay. It's a simple analytical result, okay. And so the minimum value of this is at k equals pi. So the gap is at k equals pi. So that's 20 over 27, right? So that's about 0.74, which actually seems to do pretty well compared to the numerical calculations for the AKLT model. The main thing about this is that it has a shape like this. If you plot it versus k, 0 versus pi, the minimum is at pi. Okay, so omega k versus k looks like that. And this is actually the general shape of the lowest excitation of spin 1 chain. Not just the AKLT model, but even the spin 1 chain, Heisenberg chain without the biquadratic coupling. Okay, so the minimum gap is at pi, k equals pi rather than k equals 0. That's the Howland gap. It's much bigger here, but anyway, this normalization is not the same as the normalization of the Heisenberg chain. Okay, now let me turn to something else, which is the question of whether matrix products, states, can possibly describe phase transitions. Okay, so this is actually a more recent paper. So this is by Wolf, Ortiz, Strate, and Sirac. So PRL 97, 110403, 2006. All right, 2006. So basically, we found that if you look at correlation function, 2-point correlation functions, these go as lambda 2 by lambda 1 to the power n, right, for n going to infinity, where lambda 2 and lambda 1 are the second largest and the largest eigenvalues of the transfer matrix. Okay. So just based on this, you see that matrix product states will always describe states where you have no long range order. Okay. The 2-point correlation falls off exponentially, unless lambda 2 happens to be exactly equal to lambda 1. Okay. So the exception is that if lambda 2 is equal to lambda 1 in magnitude, then this thing goes to a constant, n goes to infinity. So one thing that matrix product states can give you is this 2-point correlation going to a constant, but there is no way that it can give you a 2-point correlation which falls off as a power law. That's impossible. So either it falls off exponentially or it goes to a constant. It cannot fall off as a power law. Okay, so if you have matrix product states defining phase transition points, they'll be different from the generic quantum phase transition points where things fall off as a power law. That's true. Then, yeah, then you can do better. Yeah. Okay, so this paper actually that I referred to Wolf and others, it tells you a lot of things about getting quantum phase transitions from matrix product states, but they're different from normal phase transition points. This is one difference, that correlation functions at most can go to constant, they cannot fall off as a power law. The other thing that happens is that matrix product states, the energy typically is analytic in all the parameters. In fact, most of the time it's 0 by definition, because it's a projection onto some particular state. And so the ground state energy is typically 0, so that of course is an analytic function of all the parameters. And so you cannot get these things like, you know, cusps and peculiar power laws for the energy versus different parameters. Okay, so there are some differences between the phase transition points that you can get from matrix products and the.
All matrix product states can be represented as projections. Yes, I have.
Yes. Yes. So in fact, this paper actually makes that statement, and it refers back to some earlier papers where those are proved rigorously. Okay. Now the other interesting thing about this paper is that it teaches you a way of going back from a matrix product to a Hamiltonian. Okay. So given a matrix product state, you can find a Hamiltonian for which is the ground state. Okay. And that's a projector. Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate this. Okay, in one very simple case.
So in APLP model, it's a projector which projects out.
It projects out the total spin equal to 0 and 1 between. It projects out the total spin 2 between two neighbors. Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate this. I'll take some particular matrix product state and then find the Hamiltonian for which is the ground state. Okay. So this is a model which is a spin half chain. Okay. And so these guys randomly cook up, apparently randomly cook up. I'm sure they had some good motivation for this. A matrix product state like this, products. So since you don't like this cross with an O, let me write it as pi n, if that's better. Down, G times down, then up, up at the site n, and then product of this. Okay. So it has just one single parameter G. Okay. So we're taking this as our state. Okay. And now we're going to find the Hamiltonian for which this is the ground state. So first of all, G is some real parameter, anything from -infinity to +infinity. So if you calculate psi, you find that this you can easily see is the product 1 G squared 1 1, right? I'm just taking the squares of each of those elements, and you can see that the eigenvalues of this are 1 plus minus G. So when do the eigenvalues become equal? When G is equal to 0. Okay. So this one has a phase transition at G equal to 0. Okay.
You say divergence will predict the state now 1 plus G.
Yeah. So if you calculate, so again I should put a trace, and so this is basically equal to 1 plus, if there are L sides, this is 1 plus G to the power L plus 1 minus G to the power L.
G is larger than 1.
It doesn't matter. I mean, so one of them will dominate depending on the sign of G. One of them will dominate. Yeah. So you just divide it by that. So to normalize it, you just divide it by the larger eigenvalue to the power L. I mean, I didn't claim that this is normalized correctly at the moment. The other thing is, so there are actually many reasons why they cooked up this particular matrix product. The other thing is that there is a matrix which inverts the two rows. Okay, so it turns out that there is a matrix which I think is X is equal to 0, G 1, 0, where X acting on this matrix. So I need to give this a name. Let me call it M. X M. It doesn't really help. So down G down up up X inverse is equal to what? Shoot. Up G up down down, something like that. Okay. So basically this thing interchanges up with down. Okay. So the Hamiltonian that we are going to get after some calculation will have this symmetry. So it will have a Z2 symmetry. Okay. So just from the symmetry you can say that the Hamiltonian is going to have a Z2 symmetry where up and down are interchanged. That's the only symmetry it will have. It will not be completely rotationally invariant, but it will have the Z2 symmetry. Okay. Before getting to the Hamiltonian, you can calculate different expectation values in the same way that I showed you before. And here's an interesting expectation value. You can calculate sigma x at any site that you like. And you get this funny result that it's 4g over 1 plus g squared if g is greater than or equal to 0, and it's 0 if g is less than or equal to 0. Okay. So it's continuous, but the first derivative is not continuous. Okay. So you can see that it has some kind of phase transition at g equal to 0, but it's a very peculiar phase transition. Okay. It's not an Ising model. Yeah, it's a funny kind of non-analyticity. Whereas the Hamiltonian that we'll get, the energy for this state will be 0 for all values of g. So the energy itself will be completely analytic in g, but this is an expectation value of Sx of sigma x is not analytic in g, as you can see. Okay, so now let's try to derive the Hamiltonian. So what you do, so the way you derive the Hamiltonian is you take 3 sites. So this Hamiltonian is going to have 3 site interactions. Okay. So, so down G down up up at site n minus 1, down G down up up at site n, and then down G down up up at site n plus 1. Okay. Now this here I really need my notes. Okay. So what you do is that what we are going to do is look at the Hamiltonian that describes the spin half at site n for certain fixed values of the spins at site n minus 1 and n plus 1. Okay. So you will find that spin up at n minus 1 times spin up at n plus 1 comes with a state, it comes multiplied by a state which is g down plus up at site n. Okay. So if you just look at the matrix product involving just these 3 spins and extract from that what is the state that multiplies up n minus 1 up n plus 1, you find that it's this particular combination. So now we can cook up a Hamiltonian which is the Hamiltonian for up n minus 1 up n plus 1, and it should be okay, so I also have to normalize this correctly. So let me put square root of g squared plus 1 and call this psi 1. This is at n. So I take a Hamiltonian which is the projection onto that, identity minus psi 1 n psi 1 n. Okay. So by definition this is the Hamiltonian which acting on this state, okay, this Hamiltonian acting on that state gives you 0, and on the orthogonal state it gives you 1. Similarly, if you take up n minus 1 down n plus 1, this comes out with a state which is just down. Okay, and so I define a Hamiltonian up n minus 1 down n plus 1 as just equal to I minus down n down n. Okay, and so on for the 4 different possibilities. Now I just put them together, right? So I say that for this case, I have a Hamiltonian like this. For this case, I have a Hamiltonian like this. Okay. So what's the total Hamiltonian? So total Hamiltonian is like this. So I want to say that when the n minus 1 spins are both up, then the Hamiltonian for the nth spin should be something. So to say that the n minus 1 and n plus 1 spins are up, I can put a projection there. N minus 1, 1 plus sigma z by 2, n minus plus 1, and then the Hamiltonian is what I wrote over here, right? H, n minus 1 up, n plus 1 up, right? Then when the n minus 1 spin is up and the n plus 1 spin is down, then I have the next Hamiltonian, which is h n minus 1 up, n plus 1 down, okay? And then there are 2 more terms. Okay. So that's an explicit construction of a Hamiltonian which describes the spin at site n given the spins at the 2 neighboring sites. So you add up these and then you sum this over all the sites of the chain, right? And that gives you the total Hamiltonian. Okay, so here's the net result of everything. You discover that the final Hamiltonian is 1 over 4 1 plus g squared. It's actually a very straightforward calculation once you get this idea. G minus 1 squared sigma I sigma n minus 1 z sigma n x sigma n plus 1 z plus 2 g squared minus 1 sigma n z sigma n plus 1 z minus 1 plus g squared sigma n x plus twice 1 plus g squared. So that is the Hamiltonian, for which that state given earlier, this matrix product state, is the ground state. Yeah.
Since this, what you have started with just 2 by 2 matrix,
Yeah.
write down an ordered with a few more parameters.
Right.
And invert that.
Right.
Will it be all short range like this?
Yes. Yes.
By-
Yes.
Because you-
So that's proved in this paper by Wolf that if you take so no matter what you do, as long as the matrices that you have taken are finite dimensional and the number of states that you have taken at every site are also finite dimensional, they actually have a formula of what is the range.
I see.
They actually have an explicit formula. Okay, so I'm going to describe the Hamiltonian in detail, but this was just to show you that you can get a Hamiltonian by just following this procedure blindly. So, yeah. That's sort of expected because of the construction, because what we have done is that we have said that suppose the spins at n minus 1 and n plus 1 are something, then the Hamiltonian for the spin in between is something. So the Hamiltonian in the middle depends on the states of the spins on the neighboring sites, but it doesn't depend on any further neighbors. Okay. So, so Hamiltonian at most depends on 3 spins.
So it also means to get a 2-spin Hamiltonian, it's very difficult.
Yes, yes. So getting 2-spin Hamiltonian is actually very difficult. Typically you'll get 3-spin Hamiltonians. Okay, so now let's stare at this Hamiltonian. So it's actually a very peculiar Hamiltonian. It has a sort of Ising kind of interaction ZZ, and then it has this X term. So this part looks like a transverse Ising model, but it has the 3-spin interaction. But if you really stare at this very closely, you find that this can actually be solved by Jordan-Wigner transformation, by mapping it to fermions. Okay, and in terms of Jordan-Wigner fermions, this becomes completely quadratic. So this is actually a model where not just the ground state but all the excited states can be found exactly. Okay, but that's something that matrix product states generally are not free fermions. Free fermions
With some peculiar dispersion.
with some dispersion which you can calculate exactly. Okay, so that's the situation. Yes, the critical point is g equal to 0, so that you can actually see more explicitly. Okay, so this I'm not sure they expected, and they don't even mention this in their paper, that this can be solved exactly by Jordan-Wigner, because I think that would have taken away all the glory from the matrix product part of their. Yes, with the 3-spin term, because it has this particular structure with ZZ at the two ends and an X in the middle.
So no two-body interaction, just one body. That's what you're saying. The fermions have no two-body interaction.
So in terms of fermions, it will be purely quadratic.
That's remarkable.
Yeah. It's a free fermion. But so the first term involves fermions at sites n-1 and n+1. See, so the way you do Jordan-Wigner here, the strings involve sigma xx, products of sigma xx. Okay. So this is so this is so that goes away. The string goes away. So this one involves a interaction between fermion at n-1 and n+1. This involves fermions at neighboring sites. This involves a fermion chemical potential at the same site.
Actually, it is equal to transpose XY.
Yes. So I'm coming to that. So the other way you can think about this is that you can do the following thing. First of all, you can make this transformation. Let's interchange sigma z with sigma x, and also take sigma y to minus sigma y at all the sites. Okay. This is a unitary transformation. Okay. The next thing you can do is a duality transformation. So you know how the duality transformation goes. So if this is your original chain, n+1, n+2, you have sigma z sitting here. The dual lattice sits on the midpoints, n+12, n+3/2, and the tau z, so the tau z at n+12 is sigma z and sigma z n+1. Okay. So you can define a dual model like this. In terms of the dual model, it turns out to be a really simple model. Okay. And that also they don't say. So it looks like the following: minus 1/4 1 plus g squared, sum over n, 1 plus g squared, tau x n plus 1, plus 1 minus g squared, tau, actually they do say this, but it's sort of just a few lines in the paper, plus twice 1 minus g squared tau z n, minus twice 1 plus g squared. Okay, so basically it's a xy model in a transverse field. Okay, so now it just looks like xy interactions, nearest neighbor, yy interaction nearest neighbor, and then a tau z. Okay, so this you can believe is exactly solvable by Jordan-Wigner transformation. By the way, this last factor comes in exactly this way, so that the ground state energy of this is 0 for all values of g. So you can see, I should have gone back and told you, this previous Hamiltonian has this Z2 symmetry that I told you about. It has a Z2 symmetry which is sigma z going to minus sigma z at every place. So this is the Z2 symmetry. Okay. However, in this model, if you use transfer matrices and calculate sigma and z, you discover that sigma and z turns out to be 0 for all g. So this is another very peculiar thing. This is a model which has a Z2 symmetry, but that symmetry is never spontaneously broken at any value of g. Okay.
Change the commutation conditions.
You have to do something to sigma y and sigma x to maintain the commutation. Yeah, you have to do something to sigma y and sigma x, which I have not written down. Yeah. So sigma y goes to sigma minus sigma y, and sigma x remains sigma x. Yes. To preserve the spin commutation relations. Okay, so that's another peculiarity, that this is a system which has a Z2 symmetry which is never spontaneously broken. Okay, so again it's very different from usual phase transition. Okay. Okay, so now we see what happens at g equal to 0. So in this language, in the dual language, you can easily see what happens at g equal to 0, and it's a very simple model there. You can see that the Hamiltonian looks like
empty band.
Tau x, and exactly it's an empty band, just barely empty band. Minus twice tau and z. Okay, so the first two terms become tight binding, the tight binding model, and the chemical potential is at the bottom from the last term. Okay, so it's an exactly empty band. And in fact, the ground state is really very simple. Right? The ground state is all sites are empty. In terms of spins, it's all spins are up or down depending on what convention. So that's a particularly simple state. Okay. Hmm?
What is for small g?
It goes up, the demand will move up, produce a gap.
Yeah.
It never,
No, it's not as simple. So when you change g, once g becomes different from 0, oops, sorry. No, this I'll fix in a second. It's over here. Yeah, it was over here, right? So if you move away from g equal to 0, it's no longer isotropic.
but in terms of fermions, I bet it becomes gap.
No, that it does, but it becomes gap. But you cannot just think of it in terms of tight binding model. It also has extra terms which are like superconducting terms.
Sure.
You get
If
C.
we diagonalize it, should be some
Yeah.
fermionic
Yeah.
possibilities
Which are gapped. Right.
because
Yeah.
gapless point is only
Yeah. So the g equal to 0 point is also a gapless point. So in that sense, it's like it really is like a phase transition point.
but
It's
there's
gap.
only gapless point.
That's the only gapless point. At any other value of g, it's gapped.
What about the edge states at g plus x minus?
The edge state for g slightly positive and slightly negative.
Because this might be a topological transition where one phase doesn't have edge states and the other one has.
That okay.
Okay. Then hopping. When j is greater than 1, g is equal to Laplace point.
So maybe
Sure,
Shankar,
so
you can
that's-
explain this. I think it's an important point for the sake of students. Why do you expect that?
There's another free fermion model where you'll get similar things that so just take alternate hopping 1j 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 on 1d. So then at j equal to 1 it is gapless, j greater than 1 and j less than 1 it has a gap. And then if you cut and make a finite chain out of it, depending on where you cut, j greater than 1 will have edge states and j less than 1 doesn't have edge states. You can also relate this to a Berry phase which takes values 0 and 1. So, no, but that's,
Lying with g equal to 0 as a critical point.
Right.
So Shankar is making some statement with left and right.
So so there's g equal to 0 is here. So that's the quantum critical point.
Is there any distinction between the left?
Yeah. So the question is, so by the way, it turns out that there are 2 points which are quite interesting. G equals -1 and g equals +1. Okay. So if you go back a little bit, those 2 points you can sort of understand.
But they are gap transversalizing.
So if g is equal to either +1 or -1, then in both cases you can see that there is no tau z, right? Tau z vanishes, and then one of them is positive, the other one is 0. So then it just becomes the Ising model, classical Ising model at g equal to ±1. So those are not that interesting. But I don't know what happens for g slightly negative or slightly positive. Yeah, the band structure you're asking, whether there's a topological invariant for the band structure. Okay, so I don't know. I have not thought about that actually.
Probably not, because very matches and goes away.
Yeah. So one thing I do know is that the gap. So when you go away from g equal to 0, the gap is there at only one point in k space. It's not at 2 points. So the gap is there only at k equals 0 or pi. Yeah, I think it depends. So for g positive it's at k equal to 0 and g negative is k equals pi, or the other way. But in either case the gap is there only at, okay, so what I'm saying is that if you look at the quasi-particles, then so g equals 0, it looks like a thing like that. Okay, k versus omega k, and for g equals -1. So here I am guessing, I think the gap is like that, k equal to 0, and on this side the gap is like this, pi. I don't know if that helps.
Because pi also is only one, pi and minus pi are identified.
Yeah, pi and minus pi are identified.
Right? The minimum is probably continues to be at one point.
Actually, I don't think there's any difference. No, now that I think about it, there's no difference between plus g and minus g, because if you just change the sign of j, that just interchanges these two terms. So there's no real big difference in their nature, right? It's not that one, I don't think it's possible that one of them can be topological, the other is not topological, because they look exactly the same. It's just an interchange between tau x and tau y. Okay, so I have 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you wanted to have this row at pi, then what should have happened is that both 0 and pi should have captured states at g, right? The way you do that. Then the g equal to 0.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. So maybe these pictures are not correct. Maybe on both sides the gap is at 0 only. Yeah, maybe this picture is not correct.
But one thing one can say, at -1 and +1, the band will be flat. Because it's clear as mark.
Yes.
In terms of
The bands are completely flat.
Between
Yeah. Yeah, so actually this picture is also not correct. The band is really like that. Flat band. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is something that I really don't know anything about, but it's a very interesting thing, and I think Amit Datta actually mentioned this yesterday, which is the information content of matrix product states. Okay, so this is just something that I learned while preparing this talk, but I thought I'll tell you about it. So this is in a paper by Polman, Mukherjee. Okay, so here's the unusual spelling of the word Mukherjee. Subrata. What? No, he doesn't have the H. So what they do is they study one-dimensional system, let's say spin systems in one dimension, and what they studied is suppose you describe them by matrix product states, then as you make the matrix bigger and bigger, surely it will carry more and more information, but they wanted to quantify that. So can you say how much more information the matrix carries as you increase its dimensionality? So they proved the following, that so suppose there is again there is a single parameter g and there is a critical point gc, and this is a conventional quantum critical point of the usual type. So the correlation length blows up as you approach gc. Okay, so there is a correlation length which blows up as g minus gc to some power minus nu. Now what you can do is that you can sit exactly at g equal to gc at the critical point and use matrix product description for the ground state. Okay, so you're sitting exactly at the critical point and with matrices of dimension chi. With dimension, so these are chi cross chi matrices. That looks terrible, doesn't it? Chi cross chi. Now this is a critical point, so correlation length is infinity. So for any finite chi, of course you will not describe the ground state exactly. but you might hope that as you increase chi, then you get more and more accurate descriptions of the ground state. On the other hand, if G is not equal to Gc, there is a correlation length. So there is a correlation length which is xi, which is finite, but it blows up as you approach Gc. So what they showed is something very interesting, which is that so these two systems, okay, so the critical system with a matrix product description with chi-dimensional matrices, and a non-critical system with a correlation length xi carry the same information. Okay. So what by same information I mean you calculate the entanglement entropy, for example. So you divide the system into two parts, calculate the entanglement entropy of one part after you've got the reduced density matrix by tracing out the other part. And there are other things, not just the entanglement entropy, which is a single number. They also looked at the actual distribution of eigenvalues of the reduced density matrix. Those distributions also become identical, provided that the correlation length xi and the dimension of the matrix chi they scale with each other in some sense, in some way. Okay, so these two systems carry the same information if xi goes as chi to the power kappa. This notation is not mine; it's their notation. So I'm very sorry if all the symbols look the same. Okay, and what is this kappa? Okay, so now comes the interesting part. So what they showed is that the kappa is a universal number which just depends on the kind of quantum critical point, right, around which you are doing all these calculations. So where kappa only depends on the nature of the quantum critical point. Right. So in fact, it only depends on. So this quantum critical point, let's assume that is described by a confound field theory with some central charge C.
No, sorry. You said before that you will always get quantum critical point which is trivial, long range order exponentially decreasing. The beginning.
No. So now, the quantum critical point I'm talking about now is not the matrix product kind of quantum critical point. This is a conventional quantum critical point.
Conventional.
Yeah, this paper talks about a conventional quantum critical point, but the matrix product only comes in as a way of approximating the ground state of it at the critical point. So I'll give you examples of the kinds of systems that they study, and you'll see the conventional quantum critical points. Okay, so K only depends on the nature of the quantum critical point. In fact, it only needs one piece of information about the quantum critical point, in particular the central charge. The central charge C. Okay, so the assumption is that this quantum critical point is described by a conformal field theory. Conformal field theory with some value of C. Okay, and they show both analytically and then they verify numerically that this kappa is equal to this peculiar object 6 over C square root of 12 by C plus 1. Okay, and then they confirm this numerically by looking at several examples. So the examples they looked at are they looked at three different examples. So one is the transverse Ising model. So sigma ix, sigma I plus 1x plus g sigma I z. Right. So this is a quantum critical point at g equals 1 with central charge equal to c equals half. So that's one example that they study. Then another example they study is the XY, the XXZ chain, right? So sum over I, sigma IX, sigma I plus 1X, sigma IY, sigma I plus 1Y. So these two are equal. Then you have a gamma which is sigma IZ, sigma I plus 1Z. So this is described by a confound field theory. This is critical for a whole range of gamma, going all the way from -1 less than gamma less than equal to 1. And it is described by a confound field theory with C equals 1. Okay. So this is another one that they study. And then they also study the biquadratic, the spin 1 chain, which is sum over I cosine theta. So this is spin 1 chain, Si dot Si plus 1 plus sine theta Si dot Si plus 1 squared. Okay, so the AKLT model was one special case of this, corresponding to tan theta is equal to 1 by root 3. This turns out this model has a confound field, has a critical point at theta equals minus pi by 4 with C equals 3 by 2, and a critical point at t equals pi by 4 with C equals 2. Okay, and they study both of these. Okay. So these are 4 cases that they study in their paper, and all the 4 cases they look at things like the entanglement entropy and the distribution of eigenvalues of the reduced density matrix, and they show that those match if the correlation length and the density, the dimension of the matrix product scale in this particular way, where kappa is given by this formula. Okay. So I thought I would tell you about this because it's an interesting paper about the information content of matrix product states. If you let the matrix become bigger and bigger. Okay.
So if I sit at GC,
Yes.
study the system with some matrix product states with size chi.
Right.
That means you're saying that I'm studying a system whose G is effectively shifted away from GC by some
Sort of. Yes. 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 So first of all, one thing that they study is the entanglement entropy. Right. So the entanglement entropy if you are away from the critical point, it goes as C by 6 log times log of the correlation length. Then they sit at the critical point with a matrix product, and they find that this goes as C kappa by 6 log of chi. Okay. So by plotting this entanglement, so in fact the first one they don't even have to study because this is known from confound field theory. So they only have to check the second one. So they just plot S versus log of the size of the density matrix. C is known, so they just have to read out the slope and get the value of kappa and see whether it matches that form expression given in terms of the central charge. So that's one test. But they actually do a more detailed test. They look at the actual distribution of eigenvalues of the reduced density matrix, and they also look at the ground state energy. That also scales with the correlation length or this chi in a certain way, and those match. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Before I thank Shima, so there will be group photograph just outside as we go towards our lunch, and then please be back. I don't know where the bus will start. It will tell you sharp at 2 o'clock. The bus will take us to Gulamo. So all of you are welcome. Please come and bring your swimsuits and also join us for dinner. Thank you. So we thank Ditman for